I think, there's something fundamentally wrong with society today. Now, I was having a conversation this weekend with another market participant about how dire the country's financial position is right now. Well-respected market pundits have been sounding the alarm. And no one's listening, really. Our spending is unsustainable as a percentage of our GDP. It's approaching 25%. Our debt to GDP is approaching 25%. Now, the interest payment on that debt next year is going to eclipse our entire defense budget. Now, there are loads of people who hate war and any spending on the military, right? And they are all too willing to march and protest about that. But I wonder if they're going to march and protest when the interest payments on our debt are more than the military spending they care so much about. And while I'm at it, when did our country become so willing to embrace and defend the barbarism that took place in Israel on October the 7th? Now, I see interview after interview of young college students ardently supporting Hamas and their actions. You know what? It's just pure evil. Financially, as a country, we're whistling by the graveyard. And culturally, we're dancing in that graveyard. Now, I knew just the person to have this chat with. Please welcome into the show, Rebecca Walser. Rebecca, this is right down your alley, I think, too. I mean, where have we gotten as a country where those two issues are, number one, we don't care about our debt, and number two, we're embracing evil? I'm flabbergasted.
Scott, the thing is that this has been a systemic dumbing down of the American populace, because we would not have agreed with this egregious spending on a debt basis, even probably 15 years ago. So really, I think the dot-com crash was the beginning of the end of the America that we know, Scott, because what it did is it took away a lot of our freedoms with the Patriot Act and national security letters and all these things. But on top of that, it started us getting into the modern monetary theory economic road. And if we weren't on it after the dot-com failure, we certainly were 100% on it with Too Big to Fail and the global financial crisis in 2008. And what that was is, hey, modern monetary theory is basically we will print and we will print and we will print at infinitum. Like there's no ending as long as we can collect enough tax revenue to service the debt. And so MMT really says, doesn't matter how much debt you go into as long as you can collect the tax base to service it. And American people have been fed this line of lies that this works, and this is valid economic theory, Keynesian economic policy, and we have bought it. So, Scott, that's why the American people aren't outraged anymore, saying, what is going on? And you know what it's going to take, unfortunately? It is going to take an implosion upon ourselves, just like the Roman Empire. We are Rome circa 2023, 2024. We are Rome, and we are going to implode upon ourselves. And that is when the American public is going to realize we stood by and we derelictly let this government run our country into the ground. Now, this republic has been taken over. It's not even capitalism anymore. This is not capitalism, Scott. This is the entire establishment has been bought out to corruption, both sides of the aisle. I hate to tell you, but it's coming out, and we are going to have to start over from the beginning to get rid of all this corruption.
You're right. I mean, you sound exactly like what we sounded like in our meeting this morning. It's about bankruptcy. As Hemingway said, it starts out slowly and then all of a sudden it happens all at once. That's absolutely what we're facing. And to your point, our debt to GDP is 125%, right? If you get up to 130%, 51 out of 52 countries that have gotten that far have defaulted. Now, the only one that hasn't defaulted was Japan, and they're way over 200% debt to GDP, right? And unfortunately, our legislators aren't looking at the 51 that defaulted. They're looking at the one that didn't and saying, you know what, we've got loads of room to run. We've got no problem yet. We can keep going. Well, to your point, when you start printing, now you might not have a default, but we're going to be paying back bondholders with dollars that don't have the spending power that they used to, which could be argued as a technical default, right? You're getting paper back that means nothing. What do you say?
Well, yeah, it's a hyperinflating of your debt. It's a Zimbabwe situation where we might not ever get to that, but that's the track that we're on. And I wouldn't use Japan as a great economic example of a country that didn't fail. We're talking about stagflation for literally 15 years, an economy that's not growing. So that is not a success story just because it didn't implode and completely collapse. That is not a success story at all. And Scott, the thing is that this is just too much. You're you're saying we're at 125, which I agree, but we are already baked into 150. Why? Because we don't have enough to combat what's coming. And so the Fed is going to pivot, and they're going to use their arsenal that they always use, which is printing more stimulus and cutting rates again.
Yep.
And that is the implosion. That is where so we might be at 125 right now, but we're at 125 with knowing that we have, and I hate to say it because everyone tells me, well, a black swan isn't predictable. This is a black swan. It just happens to be predictable. This is so predictable economically that I'm sorry, if you're out there saying it's not going to come, you just do not understand supply, demand, and the money. You just do not understand how money works and runs in the world. You don't get it.
Right. It's like an old football coach said to me, Shellady, everything looks great on paper, but unfortunately we have to play on grass, right? And that's what we have to remind ourselves that this doesn't look good on paper at all, and it's going to get worse. And to your point, you're exactly right. When we do get in a bind, and we're going to get in a bind, what the Fed's going to do is have to totally reverse course and start cutting rates and start printing more money. I mean, that's exactly how they're going to look to get out of this, and that's only going to make it worse, right? You got 30 seconds.
Well, we have BTFP. Don't forget, BTFP is still a facility that is open through March of 2024, and that is estimated to be up to $2 trillion. Right now, it's only $150 billion. So we're talking about the Fed is anticipating 2/3 of the cash to collapse in the banking system. So they know it's coming. They're prepared for it, but this is it, Scott. We are at the end. We can't save ourselves again with another stimulus and rate cut. It's not going to work this time. It's over.
Just don't have the money. We don't have the money for another pandemic either. All right. That's awesome. It's always great having you on to start the week. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Rebecca Walser, thanks for being on the show with us. That's awesome stuff. All right. By now, I've got my go-tos when we look at these markets. I do every morning. That's gold, oil, the 10-year yield, and the U.S.